Before I get started, I live streamed my full playthrough of this game and I'd like to thank everyone who joined me along the way. I'm not sure I would have made it through without people to chat with and keep me at least somewhat sane in the cold pre-dawn hours. So seriously, thanks. And if for some reason you want to watch that complete playthrough, the videos are unlisted, but I'll put a link to the playlist under this video. Anyway, Shining Force. I mentioned it briefly in my April Fool's video as the first JRPG I fully embraced, and the first game where I started to appreciate the distinctly Japanese anime-esque aesthetic of the genre. I was a big fan of Western fantasy at the time, wizards and elves and magic swords and all that sort of thing, and Shining Force had all that and more, with a distinctly Eastern edge that I loved. That said, I don't actually remember the first Shining Force all that well. It was yet another game that I never owned, but only had access to for a brief period. I hired it, rapidly devoured it, loved it, and then I had to return it. It was actually Shining Force 2 that I spent more time with, and that I have stronger memories of, and which remains one of my all-time favourite Mega Drive games. So I figured I should take another look at the first game in the series, and see what I make of it these days. The game starts with a bit of a history lesson about the ancient struggle between the forces of light and darkness. The evil Dark Dragon, and you probably didn't need me to clarify that he was evil, was locked away in another dimension and vowed to return in 1,000 years. And now, guess what? 1,000 years have passed and war ravages the land. Time for a hero to arise. Could that hero be me? So, here we go, Shining Force. And what's that subtitle? The Legacy of Great Intention? Intention? Really? Not exactly the most epic word choice. Maybe it sounds better in Japanese. Anyway, this elf kid is smart enough to know what's what. She encourages you to take up arms against Dark Dragon, and also handles the admin, like saving and loading your game and name entry, stuff like that. For nostalgia's sake, I choose the name Adzor, which was the first name I ever used when games started giving you the option. It's 10% epic and 90% goofy, so I think it suits me well. And the game starts. You're a young warrior in training, guided by your mentor Varios. Mentors in games like this tend to have the lifespan of a housefly, so I wouldn't get too attached. There's trouble a-brewin', so Varios rushes off to the castle and you follow. And you'd think it would be tough to have bad controls for just moving around an old school JRPG town, but this game kind of manages it. It feels a little clunky and unresponsive with the rigid grid-based movement, and just turning around to face an NPC you want to talk to can be a bit of a chore. It's not a huge problem, but it does take some getting used to. As does interacting with the world. To do anything, you have to open the menu with the C button, then select whatever you want to do, like talking to NPCs or opening chests or inventory management or whatever. This too is a bit clunky, and I often found myself selecting the wrong option because I was impatiently hammering the button to speed things up. Again, not a major issue, but it's just another small thing that really makes you appreciate how much the user experience has improved in games like this over the last 3 decades. Regardless of these minor difficulties, this is an otherwise pleasant 16-bit environment to explore. It's colourful, the music is cheerful and catchy, and the characters consist of nicely chunky pixelated sprites. Graphics like this are really the pinnacle of nostalgia for me. Anyway, once you make your way to the king, the plot advances. Now, the plot. There is a story in this game, but it's wafer thin. I mean, there's a fair bit to it. It's a lengthy adventure with many locations to visit, friends to meet, and villains to vanquish. But there's very little depth to any of it. Every conversation, be it an epic revelation or dastardly betrayal, is over in a few short sentences. Every moment of high action consists of maybe 1 or 2 of those chunky sprites moving back and forth, and every tragic death is depicted by those same sprites flickering into non-existence. The script of this game, which took me over 20 hours to complete, would make for a pretty quick read if it was translated into book form. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. Certainly I had no complaints when I first played Shining Force in the early 90s, as it was easily the most engaging narrative I'd come across in a console game. And it all works fine in the context of the game, which wasn't trying to be Shakespeare after all. It was just trying to present a simple but relatively compelling story, and in this it succeeded well enough. But unbeknownst to me at the time, a game series by the name of Final Fantasy was forging new ground in the world of JRPGs. Incidentally, it's worth noting that there was a remake of sorts for the Game Boy Advance in 2004, which has significantly more dialogue and includes a backstory about the main character being found with amnesia a year previously, something that was apparently left out of the English translation of the original. So, you're tasked with finding out why soldiers from the warlike nation of Runefaust have taken an interest in the Gate of the Ancients. Before you set out though, you're joined by Luke the warrior, Ken the centaur knight, Tao the mage, and Hans the useless bastard, the elven archer. Oh, also Lo the healer and your faithful old friend. At least I think that's what he's supposed to be. Characterization in this game really is minimal. And then you head to the Gate of the Ancients, discover the evil forces of Runefaust sneaking around, as evil forces typically do, and combat begins. Now, I've been calling Shining Force a JRPG, but some people would quibble with that and say it should be called an SRPG, that is, a strategy role-playing game. Having said that, Wikipedia apparently prefers the term TRPG, or tactical role-playing game. The long and the short of it is, the combat in Shining Force takes the form of large battles, where each character is a unit on the battlefield and can be moved independently and perform actions when their turn comes up. Think of it as a more varied but less deep form of chess. Each unit has different abilities and attributes. Some can move further each turn, some can cast spells, some can use long-range weapons so they don't have to get right next to a foe before they can attack. Damaging foes gives a character experience points, and killing foes gives even more, naturally enough. For every 100 XP they get, a character gains a level, whereupon they get an increase to several key statistics. It's traditional JRPG stuff. Visually, the battle scenes are also fairly traditional, but of a very high quality that really made the game stand out amongst its peers at the time. The character designs in these little one-on-one attack sequences are really well done. It's clear a large amount of care and artistry has gone into them. I'd say it's actually the enemy designs that are the highlight, as right from the start of the game the evil centaur knights and dark dwarves that you face seem genuinely threatening, and not the sort of foe you want to take lightly. That said, this first battle was really just a tutorial, there's no threat here, and I'm dead. When your main character dies, that's the end of the battle, regardless of who else is still alive or how close you are to finishing off the last of your foes. So if an enemy happens to randomly get 2 attacks in a row on the main character, as happened here, you could be totally boned, as also happened here. It's not the end of the world, you go back to the last place you saved and you get to keep whatever experience points you gained, which is important. This isn't like other JRPGs where there is an unlimited number of enemies you can wander around and fight in random encounters. When you finish a battle in this game, the enemies you defeated are gone forever. If you die, however, or better yet if you cast the Egress spell to return safely to a nearby church, any enemies you killed in a battle respawn and you get a chance to kill them again for more XP. So, death isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the randomness this game throws at you sure can be. There aren't many other JRPGs that can screw you over with RNG like this one. One enemy randomly getting a double attack or a critical hit can, as I think I've demonstrated, cost you a battle, but so can one of your team missing their own attack. Furthermore, the turn order seems to have an element of randomness to it that I can't figure out. Every now and then one unit will get a turn, then another, and then it'll be right back to the first unit, bypassing maybe dozens of other units on the field. In fairness, this is as likely to benefit you as it is to benefit the enemy, but it's still irritating as hell when it costs you a victory. What's arguably worse is the randomness when you gain a level. As mentioned, units get bonuses to their stats when they level up, but those bonuses are seemingly random. Sometimes you get a lot of hit points and attack power, which is great. Sometimes you get literally nothing, which is greatly annoying. The emulator I'm using, the one that comes with the Mega Drive collection on Steam, has a rewind function, and it took every ounce of my willpower to not just rewind when I had bad luck leveling up. But I didn't. I wanted to do this one legitimately. And if you doubt me, hey, there's 22 hours of live stream footage for you to troll through, if you really want to. In any case, the worst thing about all this randomness is that it encourages you to be extremely conservative with how you use the main character. Your instinct might be to protect him in battle and not put him on the front lines, which is what I did. And that turned out to be a mistake for fairly predictable reasons. He's a melee character. If he's not on the front lines, he's not doing damage, he's not getting kills, and if he's not getting kills, he's not getting XP. And if he's not getting XP, he's going to stay weak, fragile, and vulnerable, so he becomes essentially useless. And that's not a good thing. In the proper course of events, he should be your most valuable unit. So if you're not using him, you're handing yourself a disadvantage. Better to bite the bullet, risk a few early defeats, and level him up to a point where he can stand in the front lines without fear. Regardless, I managed to make it through this first battle, on the second attempt, which is embarrassing. You're immediately thrown into another battle, but you can move to the small building in the east to retreat to safety if you want to. You can revive fallen allies here, and oh god, I swear it feels like half my time with this game was spent just reviving allies. A little jingle plays every time someone gets revived, and if almost everyone on your team is dead, it can take a while. I've now heard the revive music more times than I've heard about how that guy used to be an adventurer like me, until he took an arrow to the knee. With that done, I feel a bit more confident starting the next battle, and another issue with this game becomes immediately apparent. The thing is, it doesn't really respect your time. It can be very slow paced at certain points, often frustratingly so. In this battle, your army starts on a narrow slice of land wedged between the mountains and the ocean. The ground is hilly, which reduces your movement range, so much so that some of your units can't move at all, because they can't make it past the allied units in their way. So you have to slowly inch your way north, and as you do so you'll start to realise just how much time you spend in this game watching the view pan around the battlefield from one enemy to the next as they each take their turn. Honestly, it sometimes feels like this game is 50% reviving allies, 50% watching the battlefield zoom around, 10% actually doing stuff, and 1% regretting the fact I never understood how percentages work. In this battle it took me 15 minutes to move my units a short distance to the north, and finally emerge onto the grassy plains. Again, this isn't an entirely bad thing. Strategy games are allowed to be slow paced. Battles wouldn't feel so significant if they were over quickly. And Shining Force is a game that focuses almost entirely on the combat. Like I said, the plot elements are light at best and exploration is minimal. So it's fine that the battles take up a lot of your time. It's just hard to avoid the feeling that they could have been streamlined a little, and there are some battles where you end up spending turn after turn just slowly moving your units over to where the enemy is entrenched, where you really start wishing the battlefields were a little smaller. And I should point out that I had absolutely no problem with the slow pacing when I first played the game. If anything, it was a benefit, as it meant the game kept me occupied for longer. Now though, seeing as I have a huge backlog of games I really need to play at some point, I kind of value my time a little more highly. Anyway, the game progresses. There's no real need for me to explain most of the plot, it's standard fantasy fare. The villainous Cain shows up with the Sword of Darkness, murders your old mentor Varios, and also the king, who meets his demise in this poignant scene. Killing this evil Cain dude is your main focus for the next part of the game. You head to the neighbouring kingdom of Alterone, only dying once if you're as terrible as me, where you are immediately imprisoned after the world's most obvious betrayal. I mean, the enemy soldiers all over the place were kind of a clue. You're just as quickly sprung from your cell by Chris, who becomes the next member of your party, and battle duly ensues. These town-based battles tend to be a bit more enjoyable than those that take place in vast outdoor spaces, partly because they give the designers a chance to create more strategic opportunities with the careful placement of bridges, pathways and walls, but mainly because it doesn't take so damn long just to get over to the enemy side of the battlefield. When you win, the king begs your forgiveness for his betrayal, and that's the end of Chapter 1. The game is split into 8 discrete chapters, each one featuring a new area to battle your way through. This means there's no real backtracking in this game, no chance to explore previous areas to find things you might have missed. And I missed plenty in this playthrough, despite the fact that the areas are relatively small, and you don't need to be all that diligent to uncover their secrets. Turns out I just ain't that diligent, I guess. Anyway, there are half a dozen or so missable party members that you can recruit, and I miss most of them. I even missed the extremely useful werewolf, despite the fact the game tells you explicitly what you need to do to recruit him, because I forgot to give a certain item to a certain person. Now, there are 30 battles in this game, and again, I'm not going to go over them all. Even I am not quite that tedious. Most of them play out pretty much the same, with your foes getting stronger as the game progresses, and your allies getting stronger at roughly the same rate, in theory at least. In practice though, you need to put some real thought into how you use your units in such a way that they're all maximally useful. And I most definitely did not achieve that in this playthrough. It's very easy to find yourself with 1 or 2 units that are incredibly powerful, while the rest are weak and feeble, as I talked about happening to my main character. It doesn't take much. If one unit happens to get lucky and get even just a level or 2 ahead of the other characters, all of a sudden they'll be killing more enemies before your weaklings can lay a hand on them, and therefore soaking up even more of the XP for themselves. It's a process that can snowball very quickly. In this playthrough, my Centaur Knights Ken and May were unstoppable juggernauts of death, while my Dwarf warriors lagged behind, and Hans, who I described earlier as a useless bastard, well, he remained a useless bastard right up until the very end. This isn't exactly game-breaking. Fortunately, it's possible for units to catch up pretty quickly if you take the time to ensure they get a few kills under their belt, but that's more time spent with a game that already demands a fair few hours. You fight your way through this cavern to acquire an orb of light. Sorry, I mean a orb of light, which does something good, no doubt. Then there's a fight in a circus tent for some reason, which I absolutely love because the enemies are right there. You barely need to move at all before battle can commence. There's an actual proper boss in this fight, and the irritating thing about bosses in this game is that they automatically regain health every turn. Sometimes they regain more health than you can actually take off them, as may be seen later on. This fight though isn't too difficult, although the difficulty is increasing. Actually, wait, no it's not. It just feels like it is, because the enemies have more HP and deal more damage. But I died on the first damn fight, and then again on the third. Technically this game might be getting easier. Or not, the mighty Adzor succumbs to poison in the next fight. So that's another death to add to the tally. Poison can be a real pain. It inflicts damage every turn and doesn't go away until you visit a church to get rid of it. Or until one of your healers uses the detox spell, but I've made such terrible strategic choices that all my healers are still so low level, they don't have access to the detox spell. Oh well, live and learn, or in this case, die and learn. Turns out I don't actually learn though. My healers remain essentially useless throughout the game, and in fact there are points where I don't have one in my party at all. This is an inadvisable strategy in most RPGs, and Shining Force is no exception. I end up having to rely on healing items, and oh god, the inventory management. This is probably the most irritating thing about Shining Force. There's no shared inventory, each character simply has 4 slots for holding onto things. One of those slots is always going to be occupied by a weapon, plus there are a few rings in the game that boost stats or can be used to cast spells in battle. Also, all quest items need to fit in there somewhere, so the amount of room available for healing items is somewhat limited. But just the process of getting and sharing out those items is a huge pain. Buying one healing item takes quite a few button presses, selecting the item, selecting who gets the item, confirming the transaction, and so on. It's not terrible, but if you want a couple of healing items for 12 units, it can take a while. You can't just buy 99 potions in this game. Buying weapons is worse. Not only do you have to buy them, you have to equip them, which requires more time in clumsy menus. And because carrying capacity is so limited, you really need to get rid of the old weapon by selling it, which takes just as long as buying. And then, of course, you'll often need to transfer items between units. The main character gets all the items you find in chests around the world, so roughly 1 billion times throughout the game you'll need to go into the items menu, select the transfer option, select the main character, select the item you want to transfer, select who you want it to go to, realize their inventory is full, go back through all those menus to select them, select which of their items you want to transfer to make room. It gets seriously annoying. In any case, before long there's a battle on a big bridge, no Gilgamesh unfortunately, and there's a bit of a twist here. The enemy is using a new weapon called a laser eye. It doesn't do much, but when it does, oh boy, you want to watch out. It takes several turns to charge up, but once it's done that, it unleashes an attack that basically hits everyone in a straight line in front of it. Fortunately, this includes your enemies. It wipes out half my team with its first attack, but fortunately they were my weaker half. Social Darwinism at its finest. Well, not really, but you know what I mean. Then there's this battle, and oh yeah, some of these battlefields are just too damn big. It takes ages just to get close enough to attack anything, and when I do, the not-so-mighty Adzor cops a critical hit to the skull. Another defeat, another eternity spent just moving my troops slowly towards the action. But it gets worse. The game hits what I think may be its lowest point with this battle a little later on. It's a similarly huge battlefield, but it's made significantly worse by the fact that there are a couple of narrow passes to make your way through, and most of the landscape consists of movement-impairing forests and hills. This is really a battle you don't want to die near the end of. Fortunately, I didn't. The very next battle, though, is a different story. This is the fight I alluded to before, where the boss simply healed more damage than I could deal, while simultaneously demolishing my forces. This is the point I decided I need to do two things. The first of these was promoting my units. When a unit in Shining Force hits level 10, they can be promoted to a new class. Knights become paladins, mages become wizards, warriors become gladiators. The main character goes from being a swordsman to a hero, as if he needed the ego boost. Now, I remembered reading that it was better to hold off on promoting your units for as long as possible, as it allowed them to get better stats in the long run. And that may be true, but at this point my unpromoted units just weren't cutting the mustard, or any condiments really. I had promoted Ken, the Centaur Knight, now Paladin, just to see how that went, and he was easily my most effective unit. So I was starting to question the wisdom of waiting to promote my other units. Maybe it's a good strategy if your other strategies don't suck, but for me at least it was definitely time to do some promoting, so that's what I did. The other thing I did was grind. Once I'd promoted everyone I could, I spent an hour or two just fighting through the first part of this battle to get everyone a few more levels. Once you promote units, they start getting more stat bonuses per level, so it didn't take too long before I felt I could actually do some damage to the boss. And so it proved, eventually. Now I have the Sword of Light, which is, well, basically a good thing. And, oh yeah, plot stuff. Turns out Cain wasn't really evil, he was just being controlled by Dark Soul, a big baddie who's even bigger and baddier. Also, if you're playing the original Japanese version, it turns out that Cain is really the main character's brother, but that's another plot element that was apparently lost in translation. Robots are starting to appear regularly amongst the enemy forces now, and they're formidable foes. Their lasers do a hell of a lot of damage when they decide to use them. They were also something I really loved about the game when I first played it. Even though their existence is never really explained, I found the merging of fantasy with sci-fi to be incredibly compelling, and it's a trope I still find appealing to this day. I think it might be because there's a stubbornly logical part of my brain that demands an explanation for magic and ghosts and monsters and all that supernatural stuff, and high technology could conceivably provide that explanation, even if it's never made explicit. Anyway, we're getting to the pointy end of the game now. Cain sacrifices himself in an attempt to stop Dark Soul, in another real tearjerker of a scene. But we have his Sword of Darkness now, which we can combine with the Sword of Light to forge the legendary Chaos Breaker, the only weapon powerful enough to defeat the resurrected Dark Dragon. Then it's off to fight King Ramalama-Ding-Dong, Ramaladu, who is, honestly, I forget, a bad guy, I guess. My first attempt ends when a friendly Chimera takes Adzor from full health to 0 with a well-timed double attack. Sigh. The second attempt goes better, but as soon as you achieve victory, you're ambushed by a massive horde of robots, the kind that like to melt faces with their lasers. I make the mistake of trying to actually fight them, and I pay the price. Turns out the better strategy is ignoring the robots and just going straight for Ramalama-Ding-Dong, who turns out to be even worse at strategy than I am, because he's just chilling at the back of the room without any real defences. That makes defeating him not too much of an issue. And now, the end truly is near. Adzor summons the lair of Dark Dragon from beneath the waves by using the Chaos Breaker at the westernmost point of the land. And incredibly simple as this looks today, I really did find this to be a genuinely epic moment way back when I first played the game. Within this lair lies the final battle, almost. It's not quite the last one, but it is maybe the toughest. You're forced through a narrow choke point while flying enemies encroach from either side. I died at least once before figuring out that you need to slowly, methodically lure in the flying enemies and deal with them before they overwhelm you. And now it really is time for the final battle. Well, very nearly. It's coming real soon, I promise. This penultimate fight isn't actually all that tough, or at least it isn't on this playthrough, largely because of a weird quirk with the enemy AI, where they sometimes choose to just ignore you. I mean, I'm bad at strategy, but I usually remember to at least attack the enemy. Not always though. There were several points where I managed to press the wrong button and so my unit just did nothing. Maybe that's what happened to the enemy AI, it pressed the wrong button. Anyway, Dark Soul isn't quite as deadly as he's cracked up to be, and Adzor has finally, now that it's almost too late, reached the point where he is unlikely to be killed in one turn. I mean, it's certainly not impossible, but it doesn't happen in this battle at least. So Dark Soul dies, and notice that giant picture of a three-headed dragon on the floor? Yeah, that's not a picture. With his dying breath, Dark Soul finally achieves his goal of resurrecting Dark Dragon. And honestly, what did he hope to achieve by this? What was it about living in a world ruled over by an openly evil, unstoppable three-headed dragon that appealed to him? I swear, some villains just don't stop to think. Oh well, doesn't matter now, the bastard's dead. Okay, now it's the final battle. Dark Dragon doesn't actually do a lot, seeing as he's basically welded to the floor. Each of his three heads cast spells, with the center head being the most powerful, but he doesn't actually move. The two skeletons on either side can move, however, and more importantly they can respawn, or at least they can if there's nothing on the black squares where they appear. Even I am able to formulate the cunning stratagem of leaving a unit on these squares, so I only have to kill the skeletons once. And then it's on to the three heads, starting with the one in the center. Now, I don't know if the game was just taking pity on me after throwing me some rather bad luck earlier on, but now the gods of RNG seem to be on my side. I randomly get quite a few double attacks, and the first head goes down relatively quickly. I might still have been screwed if I hadn't happened to have a shower of cure on hand. I'd almost forgotten about these things. They're incredibly powerful healing items that affect your whole army, and because they're so powerful, I naturally enough never use them. Yes, I'm one of those people who can go through an entire Final Fantasy game without ever using a Mega Elixir, because they're so damn useful. Anyway, since this is absolutely positively the final boss, there's only one head left, and I'm just about to kill it, so I figure I might be able to justify using one. And so I do. Moments later, the boss is dead. Hurrah, finally. But of course, it's not quite that simple. No, don't worry, it really honestly was the final boss. But it wouldn't be a JRPG without one last heroic sacrifice. It turns out being sliced to pieces isn't enough to stop Dark Dragon. The Chaos Breaker needs to be lodged permanently in his brain. Adzor obliges, but now he can't move, and the castle is sinking again. Alas. Oh well, everyone else escapes, but Adzor disappears beneath the waves, never to be seen again. At least not until the post-credit sequence about 10 minutes later, where he turns up talking to a turtle and a robot for some inexplicable reason. And that's it. That's Shining Force. Now, looking back over what I've written, I've been pretty damn critical about this game. All those criticisms are valid, the battles can be too slow-paced, the inventory management is a pain in the ass, and the plot has all the depth of a puddle on a pool table. But the fact is, I loved Shining Force when I first played it, and I kind of still do. I enjoyed large chunks of the time I spent replaying it for this video, and in fact it put me in the mood to maybe play more strategy RPGs. It occurs to me that I still need to play Final Fantasy Tactics at some point. But as for Shining Force, despite all my quibbles, it's still a fundamentally good game. It just suffers from a few usability issues that modern games don't have to contend with. The strategy elements are sound, the mechanics are quite simple, but the game is well balanced on the whole, such that even with my bad strategy I felt consistently challenged but never overwhelmed. Well, except for when the RNG decided I needed putting in my place. And when the battlefields aren't just vast outdoor environments, they're often designed with a degree of care and intelligence that asks the player to actually think about every move. And graphically, the game is a stunner, for its time at least. I'm struggling to think of a game from the era that did traditional fantasy artwork better. So on the whole, I think Shining Force deserves to be called a classic. Its gameplay perhaps hasn't aged as well as some other legendary 16-bit games, but it was great in the early 90s, and it's still worth a play today, so long as you've got a modicum of patience. Well, thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, I'm assuming there's a pretty good chance you're already subscribed, but if not, please do consider hitting that button. Until next time though, get off my lawn.